We will study the Surangama Sutra today. There's no class tomorrow. Monday through Wednesday. Next week we will have the wish-fulfilling treasury. And then the next 3 days we will study the Surangama Sutra. All the way from Monday, I would like to give a short teaching on the 37 stanzas of Bodhisattva with the commentary of Choki Dragpa. Though I don't have the oral transmission, but I think it would be good to go through it quickly, and then I think it would be easier for you to study it together afterwards. Without taking up too much of your time, I really hope that this year we can finish all the 3 texts this year. This is part of my aspiration throughout my translation. When I was translating it, I thought this is such a wonderful teaching. I really wish I could give a teaching on it. Though we don't have enough time to explain and to study it explicitly, but I think it's important to at least concisely to go through it. Another announcement is about the mantra of unfettering. For those of you who haven't finished chanting the numbers, haven't finished chanting the 10,000 times, please continue to finish it. This time I specifically retranslated the sadhana back in 1998. In fact, I already translated that, this sadhana, but the style of translation was a bit different. Therefore, I decided to retranslate it. After receiving it, I really hope that you can keep it as an emulate, that you can carry it with you, an emulate of Dharma or emulate of mantras. This is quite crucial for everyone. Since you received it, then you should practice it and you should study it throughout your whole life. This is quite important. Especially, I think nowadays, throughout our life of studying and contemplation of the Dharma, through our propagating the Dharma and benefiting sentient beings, is quite essential for us to have something to protect us. And this sadhana and mantra of unfettering is quite important to be of that function. I think I forgot one more announcement, but anyhow, let's continue with the study of Surangama Sutra. The Surangama Sutra, to me, it's not as familiar. I've studied and read some commentaries, however, not so thoroughly. Therefore, I could make mistakes, and if I did, and if I do, you should point it out. Because for any of the Dharma teachings, without the oral transmission, without the transmission that's passed down, then there could definitely be some problems or some mistakes. Anyhow, I do have the comparison of the Tibetan version and the Chinese version. The Tibetan translation is really good. Chankhya Ropidorji translated this. My hope to you is that you can study and contemplate thoroughly throughout this class. The oral presentation after class some of our Sangha members can make it here every day, or some of them can't. In that case, it would be good to bring your notes, because sometimes in our group presentations, in the group presentation after class, you can talk about or you can present the teaching that's taught today or in the last class. In this way, if you keep practicing and keep honing your skills, later on when it's time for you to propagate the Dharma teaching, you won't encounter too big of a problem. We use this method in the Lotus Sutra, in the Vimalakirti Sutra. Later on, I noticed some people, when it was time for them to give teachings to the others, that it was very helpful. It was really good. And I'm sure many of you will have the opportunity to propagate this teaching, this Surangama teaching. From certain aspects, I think especially in mainland China, people have lots of faith towards this teaching. The great masters of the past, there were lots of the masters propagating this teaching as well. For now, not too many, only a few of the great masters are giving the Dharma teaching, and the numbers are decreasing. Therefore, it is really our responsibility to give teachings. It is our responsibility to make this aspiration that I aspire in my lifetime to propagate this particular teaching. Even for one person, I'm going to give them teaching on this. We should have this aspiration. Let you be a monastic or a lay practitioner. The lay practitioners are also permitted to give teachings. Throughout history, there are periods of time where the monastics are not allowed to give teachings. Therefore, as lay practitioners, you have the opportunity to give teachings as well. Maybe now you think that, oh, no, it's not possible for me to give teachings now. It's not possible for me to give the Dharma teaching. But you never know. Especially now that Dharma is coming to a stage of concealing. At this time, if we have opportunities, we should give the teachings as much as possible, even to one person, to 10 people. This is really important. Therefore, we should definitely make a grand aspiration while we study and listen to the Surangama Sutra. Surangama Sutra was a teaching requested by Prasanati. When Ananda went to beg for alms, then he encountered a Matangi woman. Through the blessings of Manjushri requested by the Buddha, Ananda fortunately did not break his vow. After this incident, Ananda realized the importance of seeing the nature of mind and not only relying on the pure action. With this cause and condition, the Buddha started to give the teachings on the 7 ways of looking for the mind. I believe when I was giving the teachings, many people told me that they came to a certain kind of realization, especially when it comes to the part of seeing through the veils of the illusion. We need to see the real mind. That's what the Zen tradition would talk about. In terms of the Madhyamika point of view, they also talk about how to see through the veil of relative, but see the ultimate that is considered as the real mind. From this aspect, according to Master Jiao Guang there are the 10 ways of seeing the nature that is stated over here, meaning, for example, the first one talks about what you see is your mind, but not what can preserve is not your eyes, but your mind. And the nature of the mind does not move. The nature does not cease. The nature does not get lost. So there are the 10 ways of seeing the nature. And yesterday we talked about how Kodana realized the nature of mind through the word adventitious stains. It concluded with the Buddha saying, "So it is, so it is." So the Buddha concurred with him twice in the Tibetan translation, saying, "Yes, yes." So he agreed with him. Today we're going to talk about how the external phenomena doesn't move, and then the inner aspect doesn't move either. Then, in the midst of the great assembly, the thus come one bent his 5-wheeled fingers. After bending them, he opened them again. After he opened them, he bent them again. And then he asked Ananda, "What do you see now?" At that time, the great compassionate Buddha, among the 4 groups of assemblies, he bent his 5-wheeled fingers. Over here, the 5-wheeled fingers. Why 5-wheeled? Because in the sole and the palm of the Buddha, there are the 1,000-poked wheel. And the 5-wheeled fingers shows that, or points to how the Buddha's hands have those wheels, the mark of wheels. So he bent the fingers and then extended, and then bent again, and then extended again. In the previous demonstration, he bent the fingers and then demonstrated the fist. Now, in the second demonstration, he bent the fingers, extended, and then bent, and then extended. So he bent the fingers, opened them, and then bent again in the second demonstration, and then started asking Ananda, saying that, "What do you see now?" You can think to yourself, how would you answer that? Someone bent the fingers, making a fist, and then opened it, and then bent it again into a fist. After this demonstration, if we were Ananda, and if we were being questioned by the Buddha, how would you answer that question? We probably would say that, well, I see I see you bent your fingers into a fist and then open it and then close them again. We probably would answer it in this way as well. This demonstration is really important. It's a very important way of giving teachings, because as the sharp faculty practitioner or middling faculty practitioner, by this kind of demonstration, they will be able to see the nature of their minds. But as mundane beings, sometimes it's very difficult for us to have the same type of realization or get the teaching right away like that. Anyhow, the Buddha, by relying on this method, asked Ananda, and then Ananda addressed the Buddha by saying that, "I see that thus come one's 100 jeweled wheeled palms opening and closing in the midst of the assembly." Ananda then said that, "I see your 100 jeweled wheeled palms." Opening and closing within the assembly, which is quite an accurate description, because that's what the Buddha did. As Ananda or if we were to answer that question, we would probably say the same. The Buddha said to Ananda, "You see my hand open and close in the assembly. Is it my hand that opens and closes, or is it your seeing that opens and closes?" The Buddha here asked this question, so what is this? Is it my hand that's bending and opening and closing? Or is it your seeing that is opening and closing? So if you see my hand opening and closing, now I'm asking you this question. Is it my hand that is opening and closing, or is it that you're seeing that is opening and closing? Then Ananda continued to answer by saying that the world-honored one's jeweled hand opened and closed in the assembly. So he said what he saw, which was the Buddha's hand open and closed. He continued to say that I saw the thus comes one's hand itself open and closed. It was not my seeing nature that opened and closed. So he said that the Buddha presented this situation by demonstrating his hand opening and closing. And that situation was perceived. However, the seeing nature did not open nor close. Over here, the seeing nature in the Tibetan language, though it did not translate in the specific way of translating both seeing and nature, when in Tibetan language the translation is I saw thus come one's hand itself open and closed. It was not my seeing that opened and closed. That's the translation in Tibetan language. Well, Ananda's reply showed some level of realization. If the Buddha were to ask you, can you imagine what your answer would be? Then the Buddha continued to ask, what moves and what is still? Now the Buddha is starting to make a correlation between the movement and his example together. This is a pointing out of the nature of mind through pointing out the nature of movement. The Buddha continued to ask, to say, what moves and what is still? In fact, lots of the Zen teachings, they don't have the kind of logic that we have, because their logic is much more transcendent. It is more surpassable. For example, in Vajrayana, some of the teachings or some of the pointing out instructions, they don't really follow the conventional logic. They have a transcendent logic. In Tibet, there is a particular way of expressing how the disciples view the transcending logic of the senior teachers, especially when the teacher's logic is difficult to understand. Then the disciples would say sarcastically, and I think moreover with sacred outlook, they would say that, oh, this teacher is a great realized one because their wisdom is transcending wisdom. I think young people nowadays, they really prefer the conceptual logic, the very conventional logic, especially I think the Western philosophers. But whenever we read the Zen stories, for example, they're very different than our conventional logic. They transcend our way of analysis, including some teachers' way of giving teachings. Now, look at the Buddha. The Buddha over here all of a sudden started posing this question. So who is moving and who is not moving? Who is at rest? And then Ananda right away replied by saying that the Buddha's hand does not remain at rest. And since my seeing nature is beyond even stillness, how could it be at rest? The second part of his reply is quite important. The external phenomena is moving, it is not still. But then Ananda said that the seeing nature, which is the mind, as we previously already discussed, the seer is not the eyes, rather the mind. In this way, the seer, since it doesn't have stillness, since there is no stillness, then how could it have movement? Therefore, what he meant was that the mind that sees doesn't have movement, doesn't have stillness. It is beyond these two elaborations. This is the answer Ananda replied to the Buddha, and he passed this time. He's quite smart, because previously the Buddha asked this question, and then he failed the first answer, but the second time he get it right, using very good language. Very smart way of replying it. So over here he says that the Buddha's hand can move, but the mind that sees, the seeing nature, doesn't have movement, doesn't have stillness. It is beyond any kinds of movement or stillness. It is beyond any kinds of extremes, any kinds of good and bad, any kinds of existence or non-existence, any kinds of conceptual elaborations. And then after he gave this reply, the Buddha said, "So it is, so it is." Very good answer. Now you're not that stubborn anymore. The external phenomena, which is the Buddha's hand, is moving, but the mind that sees the movement of the Buddha's hand is beyond moving and not moving. This is the teaching given over here. The Sangha members over here, or whenever we see the Buddha statue, or whenever we see the great masters, whenever we see the different kinds of behavior, action, whenever they speak of good words or not good words, whenever we see the white color or the black color, whatever kinds of phenomena that displace in front of us, in front of our eyes, in front of our ears, if we can rely on that causes and conditions of phenomena and use it as a favorable condition to help us to practice on the path, so that our mind could depart from all these extremes and elaborations. For example, if I were to see a guru, sometimes his hand moves, sometimes his feet move, sometimes he moves, sometimes he doesn't, in front of my eyes. In fact, the move and not moving can be perceived, but the moving and not moving, in fact, they are the external phenomena. They are unstable. But by relying on those causes and conditions, to look at your own mind, which is beyond moving and not moving. If you can understand that, this is the nature of mind that was recognized by Ananda over here. So the mind, in fact, doesn't change based on whatever is changing outside. Let it be the hands opening and closing by the Buddha. The mind itself doesn't have a color, doesn't have shape, doesn't have anything, even the nature itself. So this is the nature of Tathagata, which is beyond conceptualization and any words. Through this cause and condition, you should be able to understand this. Then from his wheeled palm, the thus come one sent a precious ray of light flying to Ananda's right. At that time, from the wheeled palm of the Buddha flew out a ray of light. The light radiated to the right of Ananda. Ananda immediately turned his head and glanced to the right, because there is a ray of light that swiftly passed by the right side of Ananda, and then Ananda turned and looked right. Then the Buddha sent another ray of light to Ananda's left. Ananda again turned his head and glanced to the left. So his head turning right and left. Keep in mind, Ananda had not attained realization or enlightenment at that time yet. I believe many of our Sangha members also sometimes would get distracted by this, by that. They would turn around, look around, just like what Ananda is doing here. And then Buddha said to Ananda, "Why did your head move just now?" And then Ananda said, "I saw the thus come one amid a wonderful precious light which came by my left and right. And so I looked to the left and right. My head moved of it." Ananda said, "Well, I moved my head is because the Buddha emitted light to the left, to the right, and to the left. So I really couldn't help but to look left and right." So I had to do that, Ananda explained. Ananda's being very honest over here. And then over here, the Buddha told Ananda, saying that, "Ananda, when you glanced at Buddha's light and moved your head to the left and right, was it your head that moved or your seeing that moved?" Since you moved your head to the left and to the right, to look at the light that shone to the left and right, then the question is, what was moving? Was it your head or was it your seeing? Now this is the question that Buddha posed to Ananda. What was moving, your head or your seeing? Do you remember the Zen koan, the two monks talking about what was moving, the sail or the eyes or the seeing? How would you answer that question? Whenever we encounter some questions, we have to be able to come up with different answers too. Someone posed a very sharp question today, and then I had to get out of that situation and then asked a sharp question back. The Buddha over here did exactly the same. He asked the sharp question, and he said, was it your head moving or was it your seeing moving? Ananda then replied by saying that, well, honored one, my head moved of it itself. Since my seeing nature is beyond even cessation, how could it move? My seeing nature is beyond stillness, beyond cessation. How could it be moving? The way Ananda answered the question is actually quite good. So he said that, yes, my body moved, but my mind is beyond moving and not moving. Because moving and not moving, they are dependent on each other as reference points. So if you don't have stillness, how could it have moving? How could you have move? If you don't have move, how could you have stillness? Just as Son and Father exists only with one of them as a reference point. Without a reference point, then how could you say one exists or one doesn't? And then he said, well, doesn't matter how much I try to look for it, there is nothing that is still. If there is nothing that is still, then how could there be something that is moving? Doesn't matter how much I try to observe it, if I can't find anything that is still, then when we discuss the movement, it is just like talking about the horn on a rabbit and the hair on the tortoise. There's nothing like that can be found. So this is also a sign of his realization. I remember that I read a story of Zen Master Wu Ye. When he was young, he exhibited great signs of virtuous roots. And later, he propagated mainly of the Parinirvana Sutra, and especially, I think, lots of the Chan masters, they give teachings on the Parinirvana Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, the Vimalakirti Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, the Medicine Buddha Sutra, as well as the Surangama Sutra. Whenever you read through their life stories or hear the different kinds of stories of different masters, you realize there were so many great masters. They tried their very best to propagate the correct Dharma, especially through the ways of giving teachings. Nowadays, when we look at our current situation, people invest lots of effort into building stupas, building monasteries, and building various kinds of architectures. But what's more important than building those centers is to build the banner of Dharma, of the correct Dharma. Even if you stay at a very small place, a very small temple or a very small place, and if you can gather about a dozen of people to attentively study the Dharma and engage in contemplation and practice, then that is so much better than any other architecture. Many of our current Sangha members, I think because they have lots of this habitual pattern, their virtuous roots, they really engaged a long period of time in studying contemplation and practice. And whenever they have the opportunity, then they can go out and propagate the Dharma and give teachings to the sentient beings to benefit them in such a way. So in terms of benefiting beings and propagating Dharma, I think giving teachings is really the most important. When you have the opportunity to give teachings, then it would be crucial for you not to be contaminated by the 8 worldly concerns. Do not care about your fame, do not be entangled by wealth, do not get entangled by any of those 8 worldly concerns. even if you can't say that you completely renounced from the 8 worldly dharmas, at least your aspiration should be only benefiting the others and not for anything else. If you have this kind of aspiration, then you can benefit sentient beings, even if it's a very small center, even if it's a very small house, you can still benefit sentient beings with the Amrita-like Dharma. From what I heard, there are people who have lots of good connections, and then they have lots of provisions, and they got lots of offering from the others. So with those kinds of offerings they receive, instead of putting those money into propagation of Dharma, they would use those money in the development of software or invested in the real estate market, but not propagating the correct teaching. So the rest of those, building temples and so on and so forth, those are really the charitable things that you can do. Those are fine, but they're not as good as propagating the correct Dharma. I don't think that is the best activity to do. Okay, now let's get back to the story I was going to tell you. I was going to tell you the story of Master Wu, Zen master. He was a great master throughout history, and he was giving teachings on Mahayana Sutra. He was well known for that. He was very well known even back in his time. He went to visit Zen Master Mazu. When he first went there, though Master Wu looked very handsome, tall, and has a very deep, strong voice, usually people would consider those are the signs of being a person with great deal of merit. But somehow, Master Mazu didn't really think too highly of him. He said that, well, you have a very good-looking temple there, but you don't have a Buddha inside, meaning that he has not attained the realization inside yet. And then Master Wu humbly asked Mazu to give him blessings and give him a piece of instruction. And then Mazu said that, no, I'm too busy, just go. And then time to go. Then Master Wu couldn't really do much, and so he agreed and he just left. While he was stepping out, all of a sudden Master Mazu called his name, and then when he turned his head, Master Mazu said, well, this is it. Just because of this koan, right away Master Wu attained enlightenment. And for such reason, he had great gratitude to Master Mazu. So usually, whenever we hear the great master saying that, no, I'm not going to give you teaching, just get out. Whenever we hear masters say that, and then whenever we receive such kind of feedback, we probably would feel quite upset. But over here, the great master, after calling his name, Master Wu attained enlightenment. Maybe that would happen to you as well. Whenever people call you after the class, and all of a sudden you turn your back and maybe you would fall because we have snow over here still, and maybe you would slip, and then by the time you get out, get back on your feet, maybe you're no longer an ordinary being but an enlightened one. That could be possible. Don't do that on purpose though. Now to continue with the previous conversation between Ananda and the Buddha, Ananda previously already responded by saying that my mind doesn't have stillness. How could there be motion? And then the Buddha said, so it is. Then this passage is a summary. Then the thus come one told everyone in the great assembly of the 4 groups of disciples. And then he said that, suppose other living beings are called what moves as the dust, and what does not dwell, the guest. Because previously we already talked about dust and guest, so stains and adventitious. Just in case those people or those disciples in the assembly have not understand what the Buddha taught. So the Buddha then again expounded on guest and dust. Previously, the teaching was mainly on movement and stillness. But over here, now the Buddha points out what moves is called the dust, and what does not dwell, the guest. In fact, what does not dwell is called the guest, which is also the dust, except the guest is a little bit more still than that of dust, because dust could move much faster. That's my take on it. Previously, Kodana explained already what or how he understood on the dust and the guest, and then the Buddha continued to expound from his angle. He then said, "You notice that it was Ananda's head that moved. The seeing did not move. So look at Ananda. Ananda's head moved. The seeing did not move." The seeing is devoid of elaboration, you can say that. You also notice that it was my hand which opened and closed. The seeing did not stretch or bend. Now it is a display by Buddha and Ananda, saying that look at Ananda first, look at his head. That moved, but the seeing did not move. My hand opened and closed, but the seeing did not stretch or bend. And then the Buddha continued to say, why do you continue to take something moving, like your body and its environment, to be in substantial existence? Why do you perceive this body that is moving as your body and take the environment to be in substantial existence as truly existent? Our body is constantly moving. Similarly, our external phenomena, the environment that's made of substantial material, they're also constantly moving. This is agreed upon by the modern physicists as well. The Buddha said that, well, the body of Ananda, the hands of the Buddha, they're all moving, but the mind does not move. The seeing doesn't move. So now the question is, why then would you continue to take something moving like your body and its environment to be in substantial existence? This is really because you have not seen the true nature of your mind yet. It is because you have lost your true essence of your mind or have not seen it yet. Therefore, from beginningless time till now, you're still lost. Our conceptual mind constantly creates this production and extinction. It kept on moving. And then we continuously to make various kinds of karmic prints. The Buddha continued to say that you have lost your true nature and conduct yourselves in this completely reversed way. Everything is upside down. Having lost your true nature and mind, you recognize objects as yourself, and it is you who cling to the flowing and turning of the revolving wheel that is samsara. Out of all the losts, the most pitiful and shameful is that to lose wisdom, to lose the true nature. Just as according to the Jakata Sutra, it says that losing family, friends, wealth, and status, those are the small losts. If one were to lose the true nature and the noble wisdom, that is indeed a big loss. Having lost your true nature and mind, you recognize objects as yourself. I think many sentient, the majority of the sentient beings, they have lost their true nature. They have not recognized the true nature of their minds, and then recognize objects as themselves to generate a sense of subject and object to cling upon. In this way, the sentient beings continuously take rebirth in the 6 realms without any hope to attain liberation. Now, due to Ananda and Buddha's performance with the Ananda's movement of looking left to right, with the Buddha shining lights towards left to right of of Ananda, with this kind of presentation, then the sentient beings receive this lesson of what is mind, what is moving, what is guessed, what is not moving. If we were to understand the nature of mind, then we wouldn't have been still suffering in samsara. It is sadly because we haven't done that. It is because we have not eradicated the root of samsara. Without recognizing the mind, then the nature of mind, we won't be able to eradicate the root. And then we will be staying in the samsara for limitless amount of time. So how sad would that be? That is why in the last few days, I kept on trying to hint you about this is quite difficult to give teachings like this right now, though that I did not say that this is a time of war or a time of famine, but from different aspects, our life have completely changed, completely turned upside down. Everything had changed. You probably feel that, oh, I live in Larungar and I don't know what's happening outside. Everything's exactly the same. But that's not true, because everything changes very quickly, instantaneously sometimes. So at this period of time in history, if we have not attained a treasure like this, if we have not received a peace instruction like this, a way to recognize the nature of our mind like this, then we will be still continuously take rebirth again and again in samsara, and without knowing when we will attain liberation. Therefore, even if we have one class or half a class, do not waste your time. You have to cherish it. Whenever we have anything, sometimes we take it for granted. Whenever we lose it, then we tend to feel regret. So before we lose it, let's cherish whatever we have right now. Now, out of the 10 ways of seeing the nature of mind, the second one is complete. Let's look at the third one now, which is seeing does not become extinct. When Ananda and the Great Assembly heard the Buddha's instructions, they became peaceful and composed, both in body and mind. So Ananda at that time with the Great Assembly, after hearing the teaching given by the Buddha on the nature of seeing does not move, after hearing this teaching, the Great Assembly and Ananda abide in this peaceful and calm state. In the modern language, I think you can say that they feel very secure. The Tibetan translation says that they're very comfortable and composed both in physical body and their mind. Just like how some of our fellow practitioners, after hearing some supreme Vajrayana teaching, though not attained full realization, but they feel lots of gratefulness and they feel lots of joy after receiving the Dharma teaching. Ananda and the Great Assembly felt similarly at that time, probably because after the Buddha's teaching of the 7 places of the illusory mind, and then the pointing out of the nature of mind, at that time they started to get a sense that the mind is not moving. And then at that time, their body and mind started to get very composed and peaceful. They recognized that it is only because they've lost the nature of mind till today. They recollected that since time without beginning, they had strayed from their fundamental true mind by mistaking the shadows of their causally conditioned differentiating minds as something real and substantial. So, over here, it points out that the phenomenal world or the objects are not real. The differentiating mind, they would grasp onto the phenomenal world. That is like a dream and like an illusion. And constantly, this differentiating mind would grasp onto it by differentiating it as this is white, this is red, this is beautiful, that is ugly, all kinds of dualistic thoughts. So in this way, we lose our true mind. And in this way, we continuously to dwell in samsara. But over here it says that on this day, they had awakened to such illusions and misconceptions, like a lost infant who rejoins its beloved mother after a long separation. They put their palms together to make obeisance to the Buddha. Whenever we encounter the Guru, and especially the supreme teachings from the Guru, it is just like a lost infant who rejoins the beloved mother after a long time. Surangama Sutra is indeed extremely profound, kept on talking about the nature of mind. So today over here, Ananda feels exactly like how he returned back to the embrace of the mother after a long separation. Ananda felt extremely grateful and joined his palms together, and then he prostrated to the Buddha. Maybe it's part of the translation reasons. I think the Tibetan translation is quite clear. They then fold their hands and then paid obeisance or started to supplicate to the Buddha by saying that they wish to hear more such words from the Thus Come One, as to enlighten them to the dual nature of body and mind. Ananda's body is at ease, and at the same time, he exhibited a great sense of respect as well as joy. So the body is really the expression of the mind. Therefore, over here, Ananda exhibited these expressions and then supplicated to the Buddha, saying that, could the Buddha please give more teachings on the dualistic aspects of the nature of body and mind, what is false and what is real, what is empty and what is substantial, what is subject to production and extinction, and what transcends production and extinction. Some parts of it is a little bit difficult to understand, but over here he supplicated to the Buddha, saying that, could you please give us more teachings on what is false and what is real? The false over here refers to temporary, and real is ultimate, or conventional and ultimate. What is empty and what is real? Empty refers to the dreamlike and illusory-like quality. Also, what is substantial, the substance that could perform a function. Also, what is production and extinction, the production and extinction in conventional and in unconventional world. Also, in the ultimate sense, it is without production, without extinction. So Ananda requested Buddha, please clarify this to us, because everything presented over here, all the questions that's presented over here, they are of antonyms. They're completely opposite. The false and true, the empty and substantial, production and extinction, all of these. Altogether, it is that Ananda asked the Buddha, saying that, could you please talk more on conventional truth and on the ultimate truth? At that time, before the Buddha gave the teaching to Ananda, the king arises, the king Pasenadi. So Ananda couldn't continue with the question because the king approaches. Sometimes whenever we study sutras like this, it feels like we time traveled all the way back to 2,000 something years ago, 2,500 years ago, right over there in front of the Buddha and the whole assembly, watching the whole situation, the teaching situation. If you watch the TV show of Buddha, you probably have seen the actor who played Pasenadi. He's quite a magnificent king. Pasenadi came forth to invite the Buddha. It said that he was born on the same year, same month, and same day with the Buddha. He was endowed with great merit. Also, there is another name to him, meaning the king of the moon. Some Mahayana Sutra states that he has quite a high level of realization up to the fourth bhumi. So at that time, King Pasenadi stood up. He rose and said to the Buddha, in the past, when I had not yet received the teachings of the Buddha, before he met the Buddha, before he received the teachings from the Buddha, he met Katyayana. The Katyayana over here he referred to is not the disciple of the Buddha, rather Katyayana, the heretic teacher. And Varatiputra. I believe these two are the two heretics teacher out of the six, both of whom said that this body is annihilated after death. So they all said that after the body and mind parted in the annihilistic way, then this annihilatedness is called, this annihilated state after death is called nirvana. According to Hinduism, in fact, there are lots of these kinds of teachings talking about how the body enters into the four elements, and then the four elements into, and then the mind enters into the space, and that is called nirvana. They still consider it in such a way. They still believe that's the case for nirvana. Now, although I have met the Buddha, I still have doubts about their words. How much I wish to be enlightened to the ways and means to perceive and realize the true mind. Ananda previously asked a question about relative truth and ultimate truth, but over here, Pasenadi asked the question which is kind of similar to that of Ananda's. He asked about the question of extinction, asking, could you please explain? Could you explain so that I can understand how to be enlightened to the ways and means to perceive and realize the true mind, thereby proving that it transcends production and extinction? Who asked a better question, Ananda or Pasenadi? Transcends production and extinction. Is that a question on Buddha nature then? Look at the kings back then. They are really wonderful. They asked such profound questions. But now look at the kings in this world. They only talk about all kinds of weapons, nuclear weapons, whatever kinds of weapons. They only talk about that now. And then the king Pasenadi continued to ask, all those who have outflows also wish to be instructed to this subject. the outflows in Tibetan languages translated as the ordinary beings, the defiled ones, the contaminated ones, because all the arhats and all the manjushri and bodhisattvas, they don't need to listen to that anymore. So only us, the contaminated ones, need to listen to it. Now the Buddha said to the great king. Now the Buddha replied the question posed by King Pasenati first, but not to Ananda. He said, now I asked you, as it is now, is your physical body, is your body like a Vajra, indestructible and living forever, or does it change and go bad? As a great king, I would like to ask you this question. Buddha said that. Usually the Buddha would directly give the teaching. However, over here the Buddha gave the teaching in a different way by posing the question back to King Pasenati. He said that, now King Pasenati, I have a question. Your physical body, as of now, is it like a Vajra that is indestructible and living forever, or does it change and go bad? Your body, is it like an indestructible Vajra that will not go bad, that will not rot? In fact, whenever we meet the kings or whatever authorities, when people come and ask you, do you have an ID? Then first of all, you need to ask them, well, let me ask you a question first. Is your physical body like a Vajra that is indestructible and living forever? I'm sure they will get really mad at you.
然后这个时候呢，就是国王就是说是世尊啊，我今此身众从遍灭，就是这个国王就是说啥世尊啊。
Then the king replied by saying that, world-honored one, this body of mine will keep changing until it eventually becomes extinct.
因为国王是他以前是
King Pasenati studied heretics before, but later on he became a great Dharma Raja, a great king who hosted the Dharma, also a good friend of Shakyamuni Buddha. So he said that, well, I'm sure my body will become extinct. So he's very good at the understanding of impermanence. Then the Buddha said that, great king, you have not yet become extinct. How do you know you will become extinct? The Buddha now purposely questioned him in such a way. And then King Pasenati said that, world-honored one, although my impermanent, changing, and decaying body has not yet become extinct, I observe it now, and every passing thought fades away. Though that I have not died, my body is not extinct. However, I notice throughout my whole life, every passing thought fades away. Each new one fails to remain, but gradually perishes like fire turning to ashes. This perishing without cease convinces me that this body will eventually become completely extinct. So all kinds of production and extinction that happened to his thoughts happens again and again. Every new one will fail to remain, but it gradually perishes like fire turning to ashes. Over here, the king presented his view on impermanence to the Buddha. Just as it is stated in the Mahayana Sutra, it says that the past and the future, as well as what is present in the now, there is no sentient being whatsoever not subject to impermanence. That is simply the basic of Buddhism. Sometimes whenever we look at history, whenever we look at anything that happened in the past, and people strive to thrive, and in the future it will happen like so, and in the present moment it is happening like so. That is just impermanence. According to Mahayana Sutra, there's a sutra called the Sutra of the Buddha's teaching on releasing worry. It is found only in the Chinese Tripitaka, but not the Tibetan. However, this particular teaching is similar to that of Mahayana Sutra. It says that among all the sentient beings on the ground or in the sky, in the three realms, or born in the four ways, there is no one that is not subject to impermanence that have ever been seen or heard of. Over here it says that there is no sentient being that's not subject to impermanence. Let it be the emperors, the great kings, the great warriors, the great masters, the animals, the people, the world, everything is impermanent. So over here, the king Pasenati also said that this perishing without cease convinces me that this body will eventually become completely extinct, just as how fire turning into ashes. The Buddha over here said, so it is. So the Buddha concurred with the king's understanding of impermanence. The Buddha said, so it is, so it is. Indeed, the understanding of impermanence is so basic, at the same time it's so supreme, because the worldly beings, they don't understand it, they don't study it. Look at all the impermanent social status, the impermanent body, the impermanent fame, the impermanent everything. Yet, while everything's so impermanent, all the worldly beings strive for it. We are so impermanent, living in this world that appears without any intrinsic meaning, at the same time grasping to it. What's the meaning of it? And then continued by the Buddha, he said, Great King, at your present age, you are already old and declining. The Buddha and the king are of the same age, if you remember. So while knowing that, the Buddha reminded him, asking, at the present age, you're already old and declining. How do your appearance and complexion compare to when you were a youth? At this time, the king and the Buddha were 62 years of age. Later, we'll get into it. It will be mentioned in the later part. So over here, the Buddha said that, have you noticed the difference between now to your youth in terms of your complexion, in terms of your appearance in general? And then the king said, world-honored one, in the past when I was young, my skin was moist and shiny. So the king over here said, world-honored one, now I'm very different than when I was young. When I was young, my skin was very soft and it has a luster. I was very good looking. After I reached the prime of life, my blood and breath were full. At that time, I was very strong. The prime of life, filled with blood and essence, very alert. In the TV show, Pasanati appeared to be quite magnificent, especially around the age of 20 or 30 years of age. I think to everyone at that age, usually they have lots of strength, they look very good. However, now Pasanati continued to say that in my declining years, as I raised into old age, maybe around the time of 60 to 70 years of age, my form is withered and wizened. My body is all shriveled, lost luster, because at that age, slowly and slowly, the essence and blood start to shrivel. At that time, for someone who had never practiced upon impermanence, when they look into the mirror and see themselves in such a way, they would suffer gravely by looking at themselves. When they look into the mirror, compared to the pictures they had when they were young, they can only tear up. And when they get really old, they can't even have any tears, and they can only feel sorrow in their heart. Nowadays, many people really have lots of nostalgia towards their youth. They feel that that was the period of time when they looked beautiful. Of course, now there's the technology of Photoshop, so they can always use the Photoshop. I am also currently at this age of Pasanati, and around me, the Sangha members sitting here, you're all around that age. There's a reason, isn't it? A cause and condition. We all have gray hair, and then we have lots of wrinkles, and in the future, we will definitely take rebirth in Pure Land. Anyhow, Pasanati said when he was the king, when the king Pasanati said that when he was young and during the period of time of the prime and then the adulthood and then old age, he presented his description of his feeling of impermanence in a very short period of time. According to Milarepa's Doha, he said that when people get old, even getting up needs a lot of effort. This is really natural law. There's nothing to feel so. There's nothing to be so saddened. So I hope that when we get old, we won't get saddened, and our heart and mind will be at ease. Maybe by the aging, we can also develop a sense of realization. Sometimes I think to myself, let you be young or old, in our lifetime, in this lifetime, we have already encountered the wish-fulfilling jewel that is the Dharma. This is really crucial. If we had not met this Dharma teaching, then we're just living as the ordinary beings, just waiting for death. How much suffering that would be. At least we have faith. At least we have the malas, and we can chant and we can practice. This is really wonderful. The other day, I thought to myself, am I going to feel quite defeated by seeing all these seniors sitting beside me instead? But no, I think everyone sitting here, since they are senior practitioners, their practice are very good, and they're very attentive while listening to the class with great faith, wisdom, and right mindfulness. Therefore, I too am filled with great faith. Yes, we're no longer young. However, contemplate upon the Buddha when he was giving the teaching. He was 62 years of age. The great compassionate Buddha also had to go through that period of time of aging. And Pasanati the great king also had to go through that stage. Therefore, each of us who are just mundane beings, we also go through aging. That is just the law of impermanence. But now at least we have this opportunity to receive the teachings like this, these precious teachings brought to us by the great lineage teachers. This kind of causes and conditions are indeed really precious. I really hope that we cherish it. For lifetimes, let us aspire not to lose these kinds of causes and conditions, just as how a blind person would hold on to the tail of the elephant and following these great spiritual teachers tread on the path of liberation. This is really important. Let us stop here today.
Chubum tsone drowa drowa